Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here today. You think you all probably know, but I'm Scott Wiener. It's an honor to represent San Francisco and northern San Mateo County in the California State Senate. Thank you for that honor. And it's also an honor to serve as chair of the Senate Budget Committee during some very challenging times. I'm gonna speak for a while, and then we'll open it up to questions, which you can put into the Q&A. And I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the legislative work we're doing this year in the Senate for California. But before I get to the legislation we're working on this year, I do want to just acknowledge what has to be acknowledged, that we are in some very frightening times right now for many of us. I heard from so many folks in the community just in terms of the impacts, the very, very horrific impacts of what Elon Musk and Trump and their whole government are doing in terms of impacts in the community. So many people are being impacted, and it's getting worse and more extreme every day. And it's not just talk. They're taking actions that are harming people. And we know that a lot of these actions are going to make people's lives more expensive and worse. That's the opposite of what government should be doing. We should be finding ways to make people's lives better and more manageable and more affordable. And we know that tens of millions of people throughout the country and millions in California are either or will be impacted. I just want to assure you that in addition to taking care of business here at home in California and dealing with the problems facing California that we've been grappling with for years and that we're working very hard to solve, we're doing that work locally here in California. But we also are fighting hard every day to protect our state and our community from the onslaught that we're seeing from this administration. My colleagues and I are working hard to protect Californians' healthcare, protect your privacy, your benefits, and your rights. We know that states have considerable power. We're not all powerful, and the federal government is an extremely powerful entity, but we do have the ability to do some things to protect people, and we are really trying to push the envelope on that, and we're going to use the fullest extent of our powers to protect communities. For those who may not have been focused on this, when the legislature reconvened in December, as Senate Budget Chair, I authored legislation in a special emergency session to provide $50 million in immediate funding for our Attorney General and for legal aid providers to be able to challenge illegal actions by the Trump administration. The Attorney General, Rob Bonta, has already filed a number of lawsuits and has stopped several of Trump's illegal executive actions in court, including the president's unconstitutional effort to strip away birthright citizenship. Our city attorney, David Chu, I will also note, has been very, very proactive in working to hold the administration accountable. But in addition to these huge legal threats that we're seeing from the administration, there are other threats to our state as well. We know that Trump and Republicans in Congress have really committed themselves at this point to cutting Medicaid significantly. They passed a budget reconciliation that really cannot be met in terms of the cuts that they've committed to without cutting Medicaid in particular, but also Medicare and Social Security. Approximately 15 million Californians, just about 40% of our citizens, of our residents, rely on Medicaid for healthcare coverage. We call it Medi-Cal in California. And so we are very, very deeply concerned about what they're going to do to Medicaid. And we don't know yet, and we don't know exactly when they're going to pass the formal budget that will make any cuts. And we hope that members of Congress, not just Democrats, but Republicans too, stand up and say, we're not going to take healthcare away from our own constituents. We know that there are Republicans in California who represent districts where nearly half of their residents are on Medicaid. We also know that there is an attack going on right now on vaccine access. You may have seen that RFK Jr., his administration at HHS, is obstructing the process to create the flu vaccine for this fall. It's approximately a six-month process every year. It starts in early March when an expert advisory panel sits down and determines what are the flu strains circulating in the Southern Hemisphere. And that is an essential first step to start the process of formulating, manufacturing, and then distributing the vaccine, the flu shot, starting in September. They canceled the meeting of the advisory committee. No explanation given. As far as we know, it hasn't been scheduled. And if that doesn't get promptly scheduled, we could see significant delays in delivering the flu shot. Or my deepest concern in this space is that we may not have a flu shot this year. I pray that that's not the case. We know that they are going after the COVID shot into all of mRNA vaccine technology. And so it could be a struggle to get a COVID shot this fall. And of course, we know that they are actively working to dissuade people from vaccinating their children from measles, as we see a significant measles outbreak in Texas and New Mexico, including a few deaths of children. So this is very, very concerning. And we need to make sure in California that we're being aggressive in finding ways to get vaccines for our residents. There's also a concerted attack on science, and they are taking a wrecking ball to our amazing federal science agencies at the NIH, the CDC, the National Science Foundation, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which does so much great climate work, and which includes the National Weather Service. So I don't know why anyone would want to go after the National Weather Service, but that appears to be happening. These federal science agencies play such an essential role in our, in just in terms of scientific innovation, world-leading scientific innovation, and that we should all be proud of. An incredibly important disease tracking and disease prevention, and they are really trying to undermine or even destroy some of these agencies. The attack on the federal science agencies could have severe ramifications for the UC system, as well as Stanford and some other research institutions. We know that our UC campuses, and particularly UCSF, receive significant federal scientific research support, and perform and do cutting edge, incredibly important, life-saving scientific research. I will also note that UCSF, and that we should be proud of this, UCSF accepts far more Medicaid and Medicare patients than other UC campuses. It's really a model in terms of expansive access to healthcare. But that also means that if they really go after Medicaid and Medicare, UCSF will be disproportionately harmed. And then, of course, we know that there are federal layoffs, these just arbitrary, disgusting way they're going about mass layoffs, which are impacting residents of our community, our neighbors in San Francisco and San Mateo County. And I've, had people come up to me on the street and say, "Yep, I just got a layoff notice." We also know that this administration is engaging in a concerted attack on American universities and on academic freedom and critical thinking and just the whole idea of education at our universities. They have issued now a list of more than 60 universities that they are investigating. They are saying the investigation is for anti-Semitism. As a Jew and as co-chair of the Jewish caucus in the legislature, and as someone who I've spent a lot of time actually fighting against anti-Semitism on our college campuses, because it has been real, and we've been working on it and making some progress on it. I am here to say that is bogus. That is not why they are investigating these universities. It is not. They're not doing it because they're concerned about anti-Semitism. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in the Trump administration. They tried to elect a Nazi-aligned government in Germany, for example. They are just using it as a reason to try to attack universities, and they're also trying to deport lawful permanent residents, green card holders, including someone who was a student at Columbia who was involved in protests. Even though I have some significant disagreements with this individual they're trying to deport, that's a democracy. We're allowed to have disagreements. You don't deport people because of their opinions. So these are authoritarian tactics, and we need to be very concerned about them and stop them from doing it, because it will spread. And the guy, Mahmoud Khalil, that they're trying to deport, the green card holder, legal resident, that they're trying to deport because of his views, it's not going to stop with him or with those views. We need to put a stop to it now. And so we're, as I mentioned, I chair the Senate Budget Committee, and we are, we came into this year with an approximately balanced budget, which was great compared to the $50 billion deficit that we had to close last year. And so we were looking forward to potentially having a more normal budget year and be able to do some new things. We're very worried about what some of the cuts that they're making at the federal level around science, healthcare, et cetera, what impact that's going to have on our budget. And we don't know when we're going to know what impact it has on our budget. I also want to just note that the tariffs, the on-again, off-again tariffs and threats of tariffs that the president keeps putting out there also has real impacts on California families. We know that it's residents who are going to pay the price for these tariffs. The tariffs are going to make housing more expensive because he's putting tariffs on things like lumber and steel, in addition to trying to deport a big chunk of our construction workforce. We also know that there are a lot of staples like meats or alcohol or other items that are imported from Canada and Mexico that will now become more expensive. So if the president actually does follow through and put tariffs on, we will see a higher cost of living because of President Trump. These are really destructive policies. You can have a thoughtful conversation about tariffs. We've always had tariffs, but this is not a thoughtful conversation about tariffs. This is a president who's using tariffs as a weapon, just like he uses threats of withholding funding from states or institutions as a weapon. And it's more about his personal ego and power than it is about thoughtful tariff policy. So we are working as we push back against what this administration is doing. We're working very hard to try to make things better in California and to try to create abundance, more of the good things that make people's lives better and that will reduce costs. So I want to mention a few areas that we're working in, including healthcare, housing. We're also, the legislature will be very focused on the cost and availability of insurance this year. But on healthcare, I've introduced a few bills to try to increase access to healthcare and reduce drug costs. So first, I have a bill pending that will cap insulin copays at $35 a month. I actually put this bill on the governor's desk, passed it to the legislature in 2023. He vetoed it. We're at it again because this is really important. A lot of people are struggling to afford insulin. We are also, I have legislation to crack down on abusive practices by drug middlemen known as pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, that engage in practices that increase the cost of prescription drugs and that also drive local community pharmacies out of business. They try to force everyone to use only their mail order pharmacy. So we are moving this legislation forward. Last year, it got strong bipartisan support. It also got vetoed, and we're trying again. I'm not going to give up on this incredibly important healthcare affordability proposal. And then I have a bill to deal with the inappropriate denials of coverage by health insurance companies. When people have health insurance, they clearly should be able to get access, whether it's to mental health care or other forms of health care, and their insurance company denies it and wrongly denies it. There are very few consequences to the insurance company for wrongful denials, and particularly for systemic patterns of wrongful denials. So we're going to significantly increase accountability to try to create a strong incentive for health insurance companies to cover what people are entitled to the coverage that they've purchased when they've purchased health insurance. So it's, I think, incredibly important. And then we're, as I do every year, always the top focus is housing, and we have a few really good housing bills this year. One to allow for more housing and more dense housing around high quality public transportation, rail, bus, rapid transit, ferries, the areas where we should be focusing the most on housing, where people can just walk to transit. And so that's a bill I feel strongly about, and I hope we're able to get traction for it. We're also making it easier to get permits for housing, so we have a bill on that. And then we're trying to create better tax incentives for developers to build middle-income workforce housing. It's affordable to working people. Right now, we tend to build lower income, and then there's a lot of very higher end housing. We want to get more of that missing middle. So we have a bill to create stronger tax incentives for developers to build that kind of housing. Also, very, very focused on public transportation. Speaking of which, our public transportation systems in our part of the Bay Area, Muni, BART, AC Transit, Caltrain, face existential threats, severe service cuts if nothing happens, if we don't step up. These systems, and it's very personal for me too, because I've been now a 28-year daily Muni rider when I'm not in Sacramento. Obviously, I can't teleport into Sacramento, but I'm a daily Muni rider, and Muni is the best it's ever been in 28 years I've lived in San Francisco. But Muni, BART, all of these systems, they've had real structural challenges since before the pandemic, because we do not fund our transit systems the way they should be funded. Other countries in Asia and Europe, they put a lot more tax dollars into these systems to provide stable funding, where you can have high quality public transportation at a very affordable cost. And we don't do that in the US, and we sometimes make these systems beg. They become overly reliant on fares, and so BART and Caltrain are way too expensive. And so the pandemic, of course, poured lighter fluid on these financial problems. The systems are recovering. Muni is at almost 80% pre-pandemic ridership, so is AC Transit. Caltrain and BART, which are more fixed in their routes and have less flexibility, are lower, but they are moving up. And BART in particular has really made strides in improving the cleanliness and safety of the systems, and reduced fare evasion with the new gates that they're putting up. So they're trying really hard and making some improvements, but we can't let these systems unravel. If BART collapses, if Muni has severe service cuts, if Caltrain has severe service cuts, that would be devastating for our city, for the Bay Area. There is no downtown recovery without robust public transportation, so we can't let it happen. So we're working in the budget this year. I'm partnering with Senator Jesse Aradin from the East Bay on seeking additional budget support for public transportation. It's going to be hard given all the things I talked about earlier with what the federal government is trying to do to healthcare, but we are trying. I also have legislation, Senate Bill 63, to authorize a multi-county ballot measure to stabilize funding for public transportation. Regional transit funding politics is extremely hard, and we're working hard to try to get that bill through. I can't guarantee we'll succeed, but we have to give it our all. And this is about our future, and we can't let these systems unravel. We're also have two bills to reform and expedite permitting to get transit projects done more quickly, whether it's high-speed rail or whether it's a more local transit project. Permitting tends to cause sometimes significant delays, and so we want to make sure that we're expediting the permitting. So I have a few bills to do that. One of them is extending a law that I authored a few years ago that's already accelerated nearly 100 projects statewide. And then we're also focused on protecting communities that are being targeted by the Trump administration. We know that the administration is threatening mass deportations. And these are, in California, we have more than 1 million undocumented residents. And these are people, despite the slander from this administration, tarring undocumented immigrants as criminals. These are folks who came to the US to make lives for themselves, who live here at times for years or decades. They're raising families here, they're working, paying taxes, owning businesses, taking their kids to school, being just members of the community and trying to just live their lives. They just don't have papers, and we need to support them and be there for them. And so that's a priority in the legislature this year. And we have a lot of people sometimes don't realize how many mixed status families we have. So if mom gets deported because she's undocumented, that splits the whole family apart. And so this is real, it's real life, and we need to be there for our immigrant neighbors. And then we are also stepping up to protect the LGBTQ community, and particularly the trans people who, it's hard to overstate the horror of what this administration is trying to do to trans people. President issued like 5 executive orders in his first 2 weeks in office targeting this tiny community, approximately 1% of the population. He's trying to erase trans people from existence entirely, trying to criminalize trans people, trying to ban trans people from, basically erase trans people from public life, and targeting all trans people and particularly children, which is just despicable. And so we have a few bills to try to protect trans people's privacies, and to also make clear that California is a sanctuary for trans people, both our own residents and folks who feel the need to flee here from other states because they are being threatened. And so I have a bill to strengthen our state of refuge law for trans people, and there are some other bills that we're all working on as well. And finally, I want to mention we are focused. As last year, I was able, in terms of public safety, I was able to pass a law last year to strengthen our auto break-in statute to make it easier to hold accountable people who are breaking into cars. There was a ridiculous loophole that required the DA to prove not just that a person broke into a car, but that also that all the doors were locked on the car. And so there were cases that couldn't be prosecuted as a result. So I authored a law that removes that what we call the locked door loophole. Now, if the DA can prove that someone broke into a car, that's enough to convict the person. You don't have to have someone testify that they locked all the doors. And this year, I'm working with Mayor Lurie and with folks in the community to pass legislation to address the sale of stolen goods on our streets. This is a problem in particular in the Mission, but also in Chinatown, South of Market, other neighborhoods, where you have folks who are part of an organized crime ring where they steal from stores and then sell as if they were a street vendor on the street. So you'll see someone selling what looks like deodorant from a Walgreens, and you're wondering, why is someone selling Walgreens deodorant on the street? It's because it's most likely stolen. And it's tragic because we have an amazing ecosystem of street vendors in San Francisco, particularly in the Mission, but other neighborhoods as well. Folks who are like, they sell amazing food and crafts and other items, and they have permits, and they're small business owners, and they make the community a better place. And they are actually these folks who are selling stolen goods on the street by creating an atmosphere of crime and at times violence, are driving out the legitimate longstanding street vendors because they're scared. And so it created chaos. Mayor Breed, with the support of Supervisor Ronan, they enacted a moratorium on Mission Street, which no one wants a moratorium, but it had gotten so chaotic. So I have legislation, SB 276, sponsored by Mayor Lurie, supported by the Street Vendors Association and by other community groups in the Mission and elsewhere, to create stronger tools for the police to deal with people who are clearly selling stolen goods on the street. So that's an overview. I know that was a mouthful, but that's what we're working on. And with that, I want to thank everyone for being here today. And I'll answer some questions. I'm sorry for looking down my phone. My staff is texting me some of the questions that are coming in. So you can, again, put your questions into the Q&A. So what will happen if federal funding for Medi-Cal goes away? The answer is, it depends on what they do. In California, we have to have a balanced budget. We're not allowed to do deficit spending. And so, and the federal government pays for a big chunk of our Medi-Cal costs, including for the Medi-Cal expansion that we did under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, where the federal government pays for 90% of that expansion. We pay for the other 10%. So if they end up doing smaller Medicaid cuts, if, for example, there are some Republicans in the House who rebel and say, no, I'm not going to backstab my own constituents and kick them off of healthcare, then to an extent, we can backfill some of those cuts. And I know, like, we certainly would want to do that. There comes a point, depending on the scale of the cut, where we are not able to backfill. I need to be honest with people. The state does not have unlimited capacity to backfill federal healthcare cuts because we have to balance our budget. So it just depends on the scale. And everything happening in DC now is so chaotic. We don't know exactly what they're going to do. We don't know what line they can or can't cross in terms of losing votes and not being able to pass something. And we don't know when they're going to do it. We may pass a budget in June, and then they come back in October and do these things, and then we have to deal with that and make adjustments to our budget. So I wish I could answer the question more clearly, but the answer is we have limits to what we can backfill, and we have no idea really what they're going to end up doing in terms of the scale. How will California stand behind our gun safety laws? For example, the Trump administration is pushing to automate restoring gun ownership to people who have been convicted of crimes, including domestic violence. California has very strong gun laws. If they're not the strongest in the country, then they're tied for strongest in the country. We really push the envelope. And some of our gun safety laws have been struck down in federal court because of the extreme ridiculous interpretation of the Second Amendment that was handed down a number of years ago by the U.S. Supreme Court. So we are doing being as aggressive as we can be in promoting gun safety in California. And we do have lower gun violence rates. And actually, gun violence rates in California, the last time I checked, maybe a year or two ago, were the further away you get from the Nevada and border, the lower the gun violence rates are, because people near the border can go into Nevada and have easier access to guns. So, you know, every state has a gun violence problem, and California does too. But our gun laws, I think, do reduce that violence. And so if Trump is doing things that we think conflict or are unconstitutional in terms of overriding state authority when they don't have that power, we'll see him in court. And in terms of any federal limitations on guns that he's removing, if we don't have those limitations at the state level, which there's a good chance we do, but if we don't, we would examine that to consider whether to enact those at the state level. But rest assured that the legislature is, I know I can speak for many of my Democratic colleagues, that we're committed to strong gun safety in California. Are you working to increase funding for county health departments and CARB programs, that's the California Air Resources Board, to be a backstop to NIH and EPA rollbacks? Sort of noting what I said before, that we do not have unlimited capacity to backfill federal cuts, within reason in terms of that we have to balance our budget, we can do some things. I am very focused on the federal science cuts. California already is just such a leader in scientific research and innovation, healthcare research and innovation, and we should, I don't want to say seize the opportunity, because the opportunity seems good. It's bad. It's terrible what the federal administration is doing, but we should double down on California's leadership in science. That is something that I'm very interested in. Again, our budget is going to be very constrained this year, but I think we should look for ways to enhance California's leadership around health, around science. What can our California state legislators do to help cities and counties raise taxes on the wealthy? Well, cities right now can go to the ballot to raise taxes, for example, doing property kind of taxes like parcel taxes, some forms of progressive taxation. Under state law, we do not have in California local income taxes, and I don't see that happening. I think the politics of that, getting that kind of bill through the legislature, I'm just being honest, I don't see that happening. California itself has a very progressive income tax on both income and capital gains. Can they somehow take my Social Security money? I am still working, but have paid into it for 50 years. Can I request all the money I paid plus profit I would have earned if investing alone? So the Republicans have tried to go after Social Security before. You may recall about almost 20 years ago, George W. Bush tried to privatize Social Security, and the Democrats, led by Nancy Pelosi, said no and beat that back. I think when it comes to Social Security and also Medicare and Medicaid, cutting these things is highly unpopular. For Medicaid, which you would think might be less popular than Medicare and Social Security because it focuses on lower income people, something like 75% of Republicans oppose cutting it. Republicans. So cutting these incredibly important programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, is deeply unpopular. And so we need to create the atmosphere, political atmosphere around Congress, so that members of Congress, Republicans in Congress, do not feel like they are able to vote to cut these programs. And I know a lot of that organizing is happening, and it needs to really ramp up. There needs to be mass mobilization to protect these programs. I cannot guarantee what they're going to try to do to Social Security, but we need to beat it back. Now, I will say they are enacting some changes to Social Security that are very concerning. First of all, they're laying off people in Social Security, and they are closing down Social Security offices. And I don't want to stereotype elderly people. There are plenty of elderly people that are very good at using the computer. But there are folks who need to go into an office, either because they're not comfortable using a computer, or there's a complicated issue they're having that they need to just go and sit down with someone. And they're shutting down a number of these offices. They also announced a new rule, which I think is really atrocious, about what happens when Social Security Administration inadvertently overpays a Social Security recipient, unbeknownst to the recipient. So let's say the recipient their check goes up by $30 a month. They just assume it's like a cost of living adjustment, and don't think twice about it. And then 5 years later, that is now nearly 2,000. That's now 30. That's 12. That's 360. So let's call that almost $2,000. Before this rule change, the rule has long been that they will, to claw it back, the overpayment, they will withhold no more than 10% of your check every month until it's paid back, which can be a hardship for people, but it's 10%. Now they're saying they're going to withhold your entire check until it's paid back. So that could mean, for that nearly $2,000, that could mean several months of not getting a check for a recipient, which could mean someone can't afford their housing. So it's really cruel and heinous that they would do that. And again, these are people who did not scam the system. They just started receiving some additional funding, and when they were not entitled to it. So that's sort of my take. Some of the things they are doing, we don't know what they're going to be able to do politically, and we need to fight it and stop them from doing it. How will you and other local leaders protect people from being attacked by ICE, given their egregious overreach and violation of the First Amendment of legal residence? So in California, we have a sanctuary law. San Francisco also has one. And the purpose of the law is to say that California law enforcement agencies should not be arms of federal immigration. If immigrants start to view local police officers as being essentially immigration agents, people will not report crimes. You're not going to go be a witness. If you're scared that the police are going to deport you, or that talking to the police or going to court is going to get you deported, that makes us all of us less safe. We want people to feel comfortable reporting a crime, being a witness to a crime, etc. And so that's why we have these laws, that we can't control what ICE does. We can certainly work to not help them, and we don't need our state and local agencies. We don't want them to be arms of ICE. And so we have really restricted or prohibited that. And so we also, I think, need to have a lot of mutual aid, where people are letting each other know when ICE is doing something, when they're present. But I'll be honest, it's very scary. We know in the first Trump administration, they were sending ICE agents to courthouses, which is just awful. Like, we don't want people to be scared to go to court to testify. So I actually wrote and passed a law that prohibits attorneys from asking witnesses about their immigration status unless they pre-clear it with the judge as relevant to the case. Because we don't want people to harass people, and we don't want people to be scared to go to court. So it's really important for the local community to rally around their immigrant neighbors. But there are people now who are scared to go to work, scared to send their kids to school, and we need to be there for them and protect them. And we need to make sure people have access to legal services, to attorneys, because if someone has an attorney, they're going to be much more likely to be able to defend themselves from immigration charges or deportation. Another question. I'm very concerned about PG&E rate hikes. They are endless. It's true. They are endless. Their impact is now well beyond our low-income residents. The legislature is conspicuously silent in this matter. I know you have been doing some work on this. What actions can we expect to alleviate this incredible burden levied on us by a public corporation making billions of profits? Yes, the situation with PG&E is unacceptable. The bills are outrageously high. They keep getting more and more rate increases. The California Public Utilities Commission, in my opinion, has been too liberal in granting them those increases, and their profits are like through the roof, and it's just an unacceptable situation. I have had my fair share of fights with PG&E as a senator. And I'll be honest, I've been very successful legislating in a number of areas. In the fighting with PG&E space, I have not been particularly successful. It's not because I haven't worked my rear end off to do it, and we built good coalitions. PG&E continues to be incredibly politically powerful in California and in Sacramento. I don't like it. I think it's terrible, but they are still very powerful, and they have been able to kill a lot of bills that try to reform and regulate them. So, for example, PG&E, in addition to being way too expensive, in terms of connecting new developments, whether it's new affordable housing or a homeless shelter or whatever else, or a new business, connecting them to the electric grid so that you can turn on the lights. We've had affordable housing where it's built, it's done, the developer's done, it's ready for folks to move in, and PG&E then says, "Oh, it'll take us 9 months to turn on the lights." That's so unacceptable. We've seen it for public projects, private projects, and so I had a bill to put a timeline on, say they have to turn on the lights within 45 days. They were able to kill that bill. So I'm not in any way excusing it. It's bad. They're too powerful. They shouldn't be so powerful. But I'm hoping that this year we might finally be able to take some action because people are so at their wits' end. So stay tuned. And I can't guarantee success, but stay tuned. Is the state doing anything to prepare for an increase of aging seniors and their needs for long-term care and services? Yes, we do have an aging master plan. We have in the budget, we tried to work to support seniors through various safety net programs, including in-home healthcare, home healthcare, like in-home supportive services. We've really bolstered that over time. Because of our support for Medi-Cal, we go beyond the federal government, and so many seniors receive long-term care, including in nursing homes, through Medi-Cal. There is a broader societal issue about long-term care, and I'm not going to sit here and say that California has solved it. With not, there's an enormous amount of work to do, but I think we have made some progress in our budget. And for folks who can be at home and just need support, IHSS, in-home supportive services, is so important. And it's often a family member who's staying at home to care for someone, and then we are able to pay them so that they can do that in lieu of going out to work. But there are also IHSS workers who are not family members, who are simply not getting paid what they should be paid, but doing incredibly important work. Is there any way to divert our federal tax dollars towards our state in order to fill in funding gaps created by the federal government's action? I wish there were, but I have not figured out what that would be. If an individual withholds their taxes, of course, they're destroying the IRS, so maybe there won't be enforcement anymore. I don't know. But they can freeze your accounts, garnish your wages, do all sorts of things to you that the federal government has vast power to do. So I don't recommend to people that they divert their taxes. I appreciate the gesture. If the state tried to do something, that at some point becomes akin to, I don't know, like secession, breaking up with the feds. That hasn't historically worked out so well. And they have the military and the guns and all that kind of stuff. So we need to figure out how to stop what this government is doing, just to stop them, and then to kick them out of office, so that they're not able to do this again. What are the latest discussions around reversing Prop 13? What's your stance? We did have a Prop 13 reform on the ballot, I don't know, 3 years ago. I can't remember the exact year. It might have been 2020 or 2022. I can't remember. To remove large commercial property out of Prop 13, and it failed. So I am not optimistic about Prop 13 reform. I wish that Prop 13 were really focused on keeping homeowners in their homes. There is a good argument to have caps so that we don't have explosive property taxes, and so people have to sell their homes, especially seniors, people on fixed incomes. But Prop 13 is so much more expansive than that. Second homes, third homes are covered by it. $1 billion commercial property is covered by it. It is very expansive. But given that result, I'm not overly optimistic, but I think it's an important topic for people to keep pushing, because you never know what the future holds. Can you please speak to how Governor Newsom's recent anti-trans comments about trans athletes will impact your work to protect trans rights at the state level? Yeah, and I issued a statement on this. Governor Newsom has a new podcast where he's bringing conservative thought leaders on to talk, and I don't have a problem with having dialogue with people we disagree with. I sometimes have debates with some of my Republican colleagues, and I think that kind of back and forth can be healthy, and it's good to hear what people are saying. His first guest was a guy named Charlie Kirk, who was a truly vile, despicable human being, super racist, super bigoted against LGBTQ people, just really problematic human being. And he, during that, he raised up the issue of trans people playing sports, and the governor made statements, aligning himself with some of the folks who say that trans people shouldn't play in women's sports. It was really, I was really sad when I heard that, because Governor Newsom has been such a staunch champion for LGBTQ people for decades. Not just marriage equality, which is a big deal 20 years ago, and he took a lot of heat for that. But during my time in the Senate, he's been a really great ally to LGBTQ people. He signed a lot of really difficult bills where he took heat. And so he's been such a strong ally for our community. And so it just made me sad. And I hope it's a one-off. But the issue is what's twofold. First of all, we have this crusade to try to erase trans people from public life. And they turn it into like a moral panic, where they take an issue that is extremely limited and make it seem like it's all over the place. So for example, trans children receiving gender affirming care, the vast majority of trans kids don't receive gender affirming care. They're just living their lives and being who they are. The small percentage who do are doing so with the full support and consent of their parents and with the physician involved. So they create this moral panic that a kid's going to somehow go to school one day and be tricked and have surgery. And that's just not reality. The age of consent for physical health care, with very few exceptions, is 18. So that it's just like trying to scare parents. With sports, there are 510,000 NCAA athletes. 510,000. Do you want to know how many trans NCAA athletes there are out of the 510,000? Fewer than 10. When you look at trans kids who play sports in high school, they are there. There's the trans ninth grader just wants to run cross country. They're just trying to do their thing. There are not that many of them. And it's really, to be a trans athlete who's out, takes a lot of courage. It's scary. It can result in being bullied and being attacked and violence and being doxxed. We saw what happened to the volleyball player from San Jose State who was outed by their roommate, who had played for years on that team with no issue, outed by the roommate and just was the subject of horrible attacks nationally. And so these athletes, and the notion that they make it seem like that any trans person playing in women's sports is going to be like LeBron James going to play against like a high school girls basketball team. That's not how it, there's a lot of these trans athletes, no offense, are just regular athletes. They're just, average. There's some who are really good. There's some who are not very good. And it's a range, just like anyone else. So anyway, but the broader issue is it's so important for California to be strong in standing up for trans people, to say they're trying to erase you, but we have your backs here in California, and we're going to protect you, and we're going to stick with you. And so I think a lot of people were really hurt it hurt what the governor said, separate from any issue around sports. It hurt for a lot of people. And I know, I have good friends who I was with the other night, and I could just see how hurt she was. And so it's really important for all of us to just have trans people's backs. What are you doing to remove the red tape to get things done? Public transit projects and housing have both been a victim and a large piece of why they're struggling. This is part of my life's work, and I have, I think, 6 bills this year to cut the red tape. We have a few bills to make it easier and faster to get permits for housing, to have more of what we call ministerial approval, which means you set the rules ahead of time. And if someone checks all the boxes, complies with all the rules, they get their permit quickly. It's also known as good government. We have 2 bills on public transportation. One, there was a CEQA exemption that I legislated a few years ago for light rail, rapid bus service, bike and pedestrian projects. It's been a very successful law used here in San Francisco and elsewhere. I have a bill this year to make that permanent and to make it a little bit better. And then I have a bill around transit agencies that are building, like whether it's a rail system or bus rapid transit through multiple jurisdictions, where they have to get permits from a lot of different cities and water agencies and utilities and cable companies, and it gets like slowed down because you need to bury a cable wire that will take 2 hours to do it, and the cable company isn't responding, and then you have to demobilize your contractor. So we are putting a shot clock on those permits. They have 30 days to deal with it. And then we have also a streamlining bill that I'm pursuing for heat pumps. Heat pumps are instead of a water boiler, they are or water heater. They are clean energy. It's electric, and they're too expensive. And I hope the cost keeps coming down. But we want to make the permitting easier. And then we have a bill to make some smart changes to CEQA to make it just more rational in a few respects. So that's what we're doing on red tape. CEQA is, anyway, that's a longer issue. Hopefully everyone knows what CEQA is, CEQA. You can Google it if you don't know. Thoughts on H5N1, that is the avian flu. The avian flu is and this is another area where the Trump administration is reducing the ability of the federal government to respond to avian flu, which has been impacting, a lot of livestock. That's one of the reasons why egg prices are so high. And we want to make sure that we contain it so that it does not find a way to jump to humans in a way that we have human spread. The California Department of Public Health is taking it very seriously, and I have a lot of confidence in the work that they're doing. But boy, it is not good to lose your federal partners. So I hope the feds get back in the business of taking the avian flu very seriously. How do you see SB 222 being implemented? How will it actually help victims? SB 222 is a bill I authored, or that I've introduced, it's pending right now, to allow people who are harmed, like, for example, losing their homes or business in a climate catastrophe, for example, a wildfire, to be able to sue the oil industry for fueling climate change and for knowing, going back 60 years, that this was going to happen, and squashing the science and obstructing the transition to clean energy. It would also allow insurance companies to file what we call subrogation actions, like lawsuits against the oil industry to recover what the insurance companies have to pay out for these climate disasters. Right now, in terms of who's on the hook, who's paying for climate disasters, it's us. First and foremost, it's victims who are losing their homes, family members, businesses, their communities being burned down. They are clearly exponentially more than anyone else paying the price. But then second to the victims, it's taxpayers who, of course, as we should, are stepping up. And it is insurance policyholders, because all of our insurance is going up because of these catastrophes. And it's going to happen again. And so our bill will say, hey, let's also have the industry that is fueling climate change and that knew about these issues and obstructed the transition to clean energy. Let's have them be part of the solution too. As you can imagine, it's a controversial bill, very, very well-organized, aggressive opposition to it, which I would expect no less. It's going to be a huge fight, but we have a strong coalition of environmentalists, and it's going to be a very, very hard bill. If we are able to pass it, I don't know in what form it'll be passed, because I can never predict how a legislative process will go, but it will allow victims more ability to be compensated, because sometimes insurance doesn't cover everything. And it will also help stabilize, it won't complete, it's not going to be the complete solution, but it'll help with the instability of the insurance industry that we're seeing right now, because it will provide a subrogation right, a right to recoup losses for the insurance companies. Okay, I think we're at the end. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me today and to stick around and hear what I have to say, and thank you for the questions. As always, please don't hesitate to reach out to my office if you need help, constituent services. We're here to help. My district office, they do just amazing, amazing work to help people. The phone number at the office is 415-557-1300. And the email is senator, senator, .wiener, WIENER, I before Ian Wiener, at senate, senate.ca.gov. So thank you so much and have a wonderful evening, everyone.